She lost in her Republican primary in Wyoming last August, and it was on that stage she said she would do in the years to come whatever it took to make sure that Donald Trump did not get back into the White House. Fast forward to where we are today. On New Hampshire television, folks here in New Hampshire are going to be waking up to a new TV ad from the political organization of Liz Cheney, in which she makes a direct effort to talk about the risk of a Donald Trump presidency. We talk about the character, and we have heard time and again from conversations with Republican voters that, you know, they may grimace at January 6th. They may grimace at Donald Trump's character. But what Liz Cheney in this ad you're about to watch does is try to make the case about risk of another Donald Trump presidency, what it would look like. Take a listen to what folks in New Hampshire are waking up to here today.
Donald Trump is the only president in American history who has refused to guarantee the peaceful transfer of power.
Joe Biden
he lost the election and he knew it.
To become the president.
He betrayed millions of Americans by telling them the election was stolen.
Stop the steal.
He ignored the rulings of dozens of courts. Rather than accept his defeat, he mobilized a mob to come to Washington and march on the Capitol. Then he watched on television while the mob attacked law enforcement, invaded the Capitol, and hunted the vice president. He refused for 3 hours to tell the mob to leave. There has never been a greater dereliction of duty by any president. Trump was warned repeatedly that his plans for January 6th were illegal. He didn't care, and today he celebrates those who attacked our Capitol. Donald Trump has proven he is unfit for office. Donald Trump is a risk America can never take again.
And we begin with the continued cleanup on aisle 5 at CNN in the wake of widespread criticism over its decision to air a town hall with the twice impeached, civilly liable for sexual abuse former President Donald Trump on Wednesday night that played out more like a pep rally or a MAGA version of the Jerry Springer Show. On Thursday, CNN CEO Chris Licht mounted a defense of the town hall during the network's morning editorial call, insisting the spectacle served the public well despite the widespread condemnation, even from CNN's own media report speech. Ditto John Malone, the billionaire investor who owns large
What are you doing,
of Warner
CNN?
Brothers Discovery, which is CNN's parent company. He made his fortune buying up media companies. Al Gore, yes, the former vice president, called him Darth Vader from the Senate floor as he gobbled up small media companies. He's very close with the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, David Zaslav. He's also an unabashed conservative/libertarian and a large donor to Donald Trump's 2017 inaugural committee. In November 2021, as he was acquiring CNN, he told CNBC exactly what he would like to see for the cable news network that Ted Turner started.
I would like to see CNN evolve back to the kind of journalism that it started with and, actually have journalists, which would be unique and refreshing. Fox News, I think, in my opinion, has followed an interesting trajectory of trying to have news.
What planet is like Fox News true journalism and CNN not? CNN, I mean, I am no longer supporting them since the whole handling of Don Lemon. But, I mean, apples and oranges here.
Journalists. CNN, the thing that made CNN the most respected name that they had, was the fact that they had journalists around the world covering news at great risk to themselves. I know I'm on MSNBC. I will say that CNN did commendable work in Ukraine, amazing work in Ukraine. And so what are you calling those people? What are you calling the CNN reporters who've been killed or been injured in the line of work? What exactly is your standard for calling someone a journalist? I just don't think that statement is at all accurate or defensible.
True. We have less sanctions against North Korea today, which has a nuclear weapon, than we had against Iran, which did not have a nuclear weapon. Now, how do you figure that out? we actually brought more pressure to bear on Iran to come to the table and negotiate. So when people say we've tried everything, no, we haven't tried everything. We need to put greater pressure on sanctions, because that's the way you exhaust diplomacy. And if Donald Trump is ever going to get to the point where he has to, quote, destroy North Korea, which we all understand, this could come to blows. But you don't have to brandish that every moment so that it's always the big stick and no talk, literally, softly or otherwise. You've got to have both. And there's no sense here of a diplomatic initiative or effort by them to actually bring Russia, bring China to the table to do this. Now, you look at what we did over a period of time with Iran. It took us 35 years to actually get Iran right. And we finally got Iran right, as George Mitchell once said, you know, you have 1,000 bad days in negotiations and one good day. It takes patience. And what we need to do with North Korea is actually work with China, Russia, others, to ratchet those sanctions up to a point where they have an impact and exhaust the possibilities of diplomacy so that if it came to blows, everybody in the world would understand why. It's a last resort, not a first resort. Got to go through that process. And by the way, and this is really important, talking about getting rid of the Iran deal and going after Iran, we're all aware that Iran is doing things we don't like, and there are things we want Iran to stop doing. But if you go after the Iran deal in Iran the way he did yesterday, and you talk about throwing it out, you make your diplomatic efforts of solving North Korea far more complicated. What does North Korea think, looking at the way he's talking about shredding a deal that was made? If that's the way America behaves in the world, throwing out something that works because you don't like it, but it works, you're actually inviting a much more difficult path.
Mike Barnicle.
With the
another predator living in the White House. And I'm going to tell you something. Donald Trump has predatory nature and predatory instincts. And the thing about predators is this. By their very nature, they prey on people they perceive to be weak. They prey on people they perceive to be vulnerable. They prey on people who are in need of help, often desperate for help. And predators are cowards. What we need.
Youngest son, Ron Reagan, joins me now. He's also the MSNBC political analyst. Ron, thanks for joining me. You know, that is always such an awkward question. You're speaking for someone who is not present, and we all evolve in different ways. But Michael Reagan says that your father would not vote for Trump. I want to read his tweet, your older brother. He says, I will not be voting for Trump tomorrow in California primary. This most likely would be the first time, if my father was alive, that he would not support the nominee of the GOP. He tagged Reince Priebus on this and Newsmax as well. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think he's right. Ronald Reagan would not vote for Donald Trump, and frankly, it's shameful that so many Republican politicians, recently Paul Ryan, of course, have gotten on the Trump bandwagon. This is an absurdity of a campaign that Trump is running here. We shouldn't fool ourselves here, and we shouldn't fall into the trap of a false equivalency that somehow Trump and Clinton are playing on the same playing field or at the same level. They are not. This is a joke, and it's an absurdity, and it would be an embarrassment and a tragedy for this country if Donald Trump were somehow to be elected president. And it's the shame of the Republican Party right now that he is their presumptive nominee. Bigotry. Whether Donald Trump is a bigot himself or not, as you said, I don't know. I don't know what's in the man's heart. But it's quite obvious that he's pandering to bigotry. And to condone that as a politician, Republican or Democrat, to condone that is shameful. And these people ought to be ashamed of themselves for getting onto this bandwagon. It's awful.
Joining me now is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Madam Speaker, I want to ask you about what's next, if there's another package to come with all of the needs. Thank you very much for being with us. I just understand, though, that the president in the Oval Office has told the press pool that he was speaking sarcastically when he talked about ingesting disinfectant and some of these other remedies that he was at least asking about yesterday. It's been a big reaction to that. What is your reaction?
Well, my reaction is it was consistent with all of his other statements, which had no relationship to science, fact, evidence, data, or appropriate way to proceed. So it was consistent. But it's also consistent with Mitch McConnell saying, let the states go bankrupt. They don't believe in science.
Usual great authority on every subject.
And that's why it's hard to get them to accept the evidence.
No humility.
That we have a role to
No
do something
empathy.
to meet the needs of the American
No
people
diplomacy.
in a very direct and stronger way.
No considerations for voices other than his own.
Is it a serious problem when the President of the United States
Those
talks
do
about
not a great
something that
leader
is
make.
poisonous, which is
Just
ingesting
looking that up.
Lysol or another disinfectant, or when
How
he touts
come
a medication that has
people
not been
can't see
properly
that?
peer tested and reviewed, which the FDA is now warning against the hydroxychloroquine?
And not only that, encouraging the agencies that have responsibility for approval to approve what they want, what the administration wants, rather than what science demands. It's a terrible situation, but I don't know who's advising him scientifically, but you would have thought that there would have been a real outrage yesterday when he made this suggestion. But as I say, consistent. And that's why on Easter Sunday, I had my own epiphany and said, I cannot remain silent any longer. What he is saying is dangerous. The delay, the denial is deadly. It's a hoax. It's going to magically go away. Inject Lysol into your lungs. What is this? What is this? But nonetheless, you know what? Let's just go forward. Let's say in what we're doing legislatively that we will provide the resources for our health services and the rest to meet the needs of the American people, for our scientists to quickly, as soon as possible, find a vaccine, hopefully a cure even sooner than that, and that we will make sure that there is integrity in how it is developed and integrity in how it is distributed. That doesn't exist right now, according to what we've seen from the White House.
Well, Madam Speaker, when he suggested yesterday, he said that, we'll have a cure soon. But at the same time, according to an upcoming whistleblower complaint that we understand from Dr. Bright, who was removed from his position in charge of the vaccination research effort, that he's actually, according to this complaint and his version of it, he was removed from his job by pushing back against the recommendation from the president, the push to validate that malaria medication.
Well, my colleague, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo of California, is the chair of the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce. It was her legislation that established BARDA that he was the head of, that Dr. Bright was the head of. She has, and we all have know of his work and has respected it over time and follow that work. She will be, I understand, will be having a hearing on the subject, and we have to get to the facts as allegations are made. But this is explosive. But again, we want to be hopeful for the American people and to kind of almost minimize the impact of what the president is saying. But when he takes scientists out because they're not quickly giving approvals to his preferred choice of medicines, it's beyond me. That is a danger to our system. Efficacy and safety, they're the hallmarks of how a drug is proved and going forward. We have seen that some things he has recommended have not been safe while he was recommending them. It's very sad. I mean, again, it's a challenge, but let's recognize it's a challenge, and maybe his saying that he was just being silly or whatever he was saying about what he said yesterday, it didn't seem so when you saw him say it. He seemed like he was speaking from his usual great authority on every subject. But the fact is that we cannot be deterred by what he says at those conferences. We cannot be obsessed by doing what we're doing right now is just talking about him. We've got to be talking about what our possibilities are as we go into the future. And we're hopeful yesterday. I'm personally shaken by the fact that 50,000 people have died. I'm sure you are too, and most people are. 50,000 people have died. We have to do better. And yesterday we had some hope because we passed a bill that eventually the Republicans agreed to, that we would put $100 billion into hospitals and testing so that we could go forward. And it calls for a national strategy for testing. It calls for documenting how it is affecting different communities of color, geography, ethnicity, and the rest. And we just have to act upon what can be helpful rather than be dragged down every day. It's a tactic. It's a technique. Well, it's a diversionary tactic.
Madam Speaker, I do want to ask you going forward about something else that he said, is that there won't be more money for the post office, which is at risk of going under unless they raise prices on big shippers like Amazon. Is there anything you can do about that? Because he has a lot of power to hold up that money.
Well, as I say, in everything he says, you have to enlarge the issue. He says you should pump Lysol into your lung. He doesn't believe in science. Mitch McConnell says states should go bankrupt. They don't believe in governance. The president wants to privatize the post office. The post office has over 90% favorability among the American people. They depend on the post office as a public institution. And seniors now have always been getting their medicine by mail for a long time now, and now even more urgently. People are buying.
The far right wants Americans, especially those most vulnerable ones, to drive themselves into debt just to be healthy, just to provide an education for their children. The post office, you know, like if they will go so low as to want to pull away a basic right like the post office.
In the CARES 1 bill, we had some money in a bipartisan way, but the president, I understand, was personally rejected it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC.
I'm a Democrat, so I feel pretty much like the Democratic Party does, as you probably know. But I think we still need to ascertain the facts from a very thorough investigation. And I'm very glad that the Speaker of the House has ordained that the investigation go forward and then decide, I guess, with the whole House voting on it, whether or not to proceed with the actual impeachment of the president, which is done in the Congress, as you know, in the House of Representatives. And then the Senate, I think, is very unlikely to confirm and to actually remove President Trump from office. But if the facts reveal increasing number of things that he has actually done, then, of course, impeachment is possible and removal from office is possible.
And do you think that the White House and the State Department are right to be blocking people from testifying, preventing the facts from coming out?
No. I think that's a departure from custom and a departure from what American people expect. And I think that's one of the main things that Americans are now considering is the fact that the White House is trying to stonewall and not provide adequate information on which to base a good case to be made either for or against President Trump. So I think that in itself is going to be another item of evidence that can be used against him if he continues to stonewall.
Jimmy Carter, who is basically a century years old, was telling him, get your behind off of Twitter.
For President Trump going through this?
My advice to him would be to tell the truth, I think, for a change, and also to cut back on his Twitter feeds and give the House of Representatives and also the Senate, and I'd say the general public, the evidence that we need to form a case either for or against him.
And national security. Roland Martin joins us now. He's the host and managing editor of TV One's News One Now. Stephanie can't even speak. She's speechless. There's so many levels of this that are so ridiculous. The president retweeting someone who was arrested, a hate speech person, and then that response from Sarah Sanders.
Well, Al, it's very simple. When your house is built on a racial foundation, this is what you're going to get. When you have the president, remember, how did he rise to political prominence? It was his attacks on the birth certificate on President Barack Obama. When he announced his run, he attacked Mexicans. He has attacked numerous African Americans, the NFL players. We could go on and on and on. He is pressing the buttons of white fear in America. Just the other day, I had Charlie Sykes.
Fear-mongering. You know, this man isn't even president anymore, but for the past 7 years, arguably longer, he's just been taking people's fears, anxiety, and not appeasing them, not settling them with actual policy, actual diplomacy, actual peacemaking skills. A politician isn't there to make you so pumped up and crazy and anxious that you'll go out and just do anything. They're supposed to settle your fears.
Women Initiative, helping women start businesses around the world. Steve Mnuchin, Gary Cohn, Elaine Chao, Betsy DeVos, all the generals. What does it do to these people and their credibility? I mean, Sarah Huckabee Sanders shot her own credibility standing by the president and defending this. Yeah. But for those who work in this administration and remain silent, when the president, who is on the eve of whether we like it or not, passing an extraordinary tax reform that's a giant win for him.
And he tweets absolute garbage.
But I need anybody to watch it to understand American history. Who were the people who stood by in Plessy versus Ferguson, in Dred Scott decision? Who were the folks who stood by when it came to Sweat versus Painter? All those Supreme Court decisions. Who were the people who stood by when Marian Anderson was not allowed to sing because the Daughters of the Confederacy and had to sing at the memorial? Who were those people? The point is this here. For 398 years since 20-odd Africans arrived in August of 1619, black folks know what this is about.
We know.
These are individuals
we know.
who are consumed by power.
And now other minorities know too. Now other minorities know exactly how black people have been feeling since 1619.
I don't want to hear anything about her talking from the podium about her daughters and being the daughter of a minister when she is defending lies, defending what he does. This is the fundamental problem with this country. He pushed racial buttons. He played on racial buttons. He was elected in spite of all of that. He was elected in spite of sexism. And this is, if I had to go biblical, this is when the people said, we want a king, and the prophet made Saul the king, and guess what happened when he lost his mind? And then David came along. It's the same thing. They have allowed evil to invade the White House, and he is spreading this through his Twitter account, and the world is now reacting, and he's representing this nation. That is Donald Trump.
Roland Martin, just preach.
President Obama's, not emotion, but his kind of, it was a little bit of rage. I mean, he's not, we all know that there has to be a Saturday Night Live character created to be Rageful Obama, right? Like, he doesn't show that sort of thing. But when he showed some of his anger, I had told the control room that I wanted to play number 6, which I'm going to change my mind about, actually. Sorry, because I'm that terrible person. But the part, can we play shot number 3?
I was going to pick from
Obama. Okay, just because this is, so at this point, he has made the argument that our democracy is at stake. He has talked about how a democracy withers until it is no democracy at all, when people are talked out of the idea that our system of self-governance is what we can do to solve whatever problems that we have. But there is this moment where you see Obama, like, kind of having to reel himself back in terms of how serious he thinks this is and what we have to do about it. Let's watch that.
What we do echoes through generations. Whatever our backgrounds, we are all the children of Americans who fought the good fight. Great-grandparents working in fire traps and sweatshops without rights or representation. Farmers losing their dreams to dust. Irish and Italians and Asians and Latinos told, go back where you come from. Jews and Catholics, Muslims and Sikhs made to feel suspect for the way they worshiped. Black Americans chained and whipped and hanged, spit on for trying to sit at lunch counters, beaten for trying to vote. If anyone had a right to believe that this democracy did not work.
And this one orange man has threatened all of that. You better believe it. If you're still duped by this guy, you really, really need to listen to
And it's not even the way he normally talks about American history, right? He normally talks about the reconciling nature of our history and the ways in which we've been able to repair. And he's very much about that. I mean, he is an institutionalist. He really does deeply believe in the reparative power of America. This was, I was going to pick the exact same one because this was Barack Obama saying, this isn't even the most savage our history has been. And I'm going to explain to you how savage it has been.
And those people believe that democracy was the solution to whatever problems we have. And now we're going to be the ones who give up on democracy?
That's right.
It's just like
if we lose America, after they manage to get through all of that,
and save it and build it into what it is now.
Then and it's funny because Kamala Harris kind of ends with the same kind of flourish where she says, one day people are going to look back.
That's exactly right.
And they're going to ask us, what was it like? What did you do? And don't let yourself be caught saying, I did nothing, because you only have to vote. And it's risky now because COVID is there and voter suppression is real. And the fight against democracy, I've never seen anything like it. You know, I say it all the time. My father is rolling in his grave. He was a Reaganite. He would never recognize what the Republican Party is now because it is in many ways an insurgency against America. It's an insurgency against every value that Republicans used to claim that they held dear. They're fighting. They're not just fighting, Barack Obama. They're fighting us. They're fighting voters, the Postal Service. They're fighting every institution to break it so they can keep power.
Two former presidents today who used strong words to speak out against division and anger in our politics. President Obama campaigned for the first time since leaving the White House for Democratic candidates for governor today in New Jersey and then tonight in Virginia.
At a time when our politics just seems so divided and so angry and so nasty, is whether we can recapture that spirit, whether we support and embrace somebody who wants to bring people together. Yes, we can. You notice I haven't been commenting a lot on politics lately, but here's one thing I know. If you have to win a campaign by dividing people, you're not going to be able to govern them.
President Bush spoke out forcefully in New York. His spokesman says Donald Trump was not the intended target. But a source close to Bush acknowledged to our colleague and his old communications director, Nicole Wallace, he was aware of how his remarks would be received and in the current political climate, and confirmed that the president drafted the speech himself with the assistance of a couple of trusted aides.
Bigotry seems emboldened. Our politics seems more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication. We've seen our discourse degraded by casual cruelty. At times, it can seem like the forces pulling us apart are stronger than the forces binding us together. We've seen nationalism distorted into nativism. We've forgotten the dynamism that immigration has always brought to America. Bullying and prejudice in our public life sets a national tone, provides permission for cruelty and bigotry, and compromises the moral education of children. The only way to pass along civic values is to first live up to them.
With all that is coming out of this White House and this president, earlier this evening we got the chance to speak with a living icon of the civil rights movement, a 32-year veteran of the U.S. House of Representatives, Democratic Congressman John Lewis of Georgia. We started by discussing the language of race that the president has employed just this week. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on our broadcast tonight. I want to talk about how this week started from this president. I have to say, I'm just back from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, so this is all very current, very top of mind. But for a man like you, it's current and top of mind when you wake up in the morning, when you get dressed. It's current and top of mind every moment you are awake. Why are these tropes so damaging, so destructive, and apparently so irresistible for this president?
Well, thank you for having me tonight. I don't quite understand it. I thought some time ago that we'll come much farther along, but the scars and stains of racism are still deeply embedded in American society. And it's a shame and a disgrace that the President of the United States of America is a reflection. He's preaching the seed and sowing the seed of racism. And it's not right and it's not fair for our country.
Why is this particular go back where you came from trope so destructive, so dangerous?
Well, many people who grew up the way I did, and others, not just from the South, but other parts of the country, we heard it over and over again. Go back to your school. Go back to your restaurant. Go back to your own hotel. Go back to your country. You know, we all come from some other place except a Native American.
Now, I'll tell you what, those people who tell people who look like me to go back where we come from, if these white nationalists had to go back to Ireland, Scotland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and just rebuild their lives all over again, they'd be dying to come back to America with its Jews and its women and its transgender women and its blacks and its Latinos.
President, and he's now going to weaponize these four going forward and even further, apparently.
Well, I talk with these women and other brothers and sisters, and I tell them to keep the faith, to keep their eyes on the prize, and to never, ever give up. Because Dr. King taught us never to hate, never become bitter, because hate is too heavy a burden to bear. To believe in the way of peace, in the way of love, but to believe in the philosophy of nonviolence. And over again, I said we must respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. A young Republican came up to me today and said, "John, what must we do?" I said, "Just continue to love. It's the best way. It is the